It's no wonder there was no room in the inn. This is not literal history. And if you insist on it being literal history, you reduce so much of the Christian story to absolute historical nonsense. We are afraid to tell our people what biblical scholars know. And I find that incredible. For example, again, we've known since about 125 AD or CE that Matthew misquoted Isaiah when he wrote the birth story. You can go back, you can go online and read the dialogue with Trypho, Justin Martyr and Trypho in a dialogue, and Trypho tells Justin Martyr, this is about 125, that Matthew has misquoted Isaiah. Isaiah said, 7:14, this is not what you hear in your pageants, but Isaiah says in 7:14, behold, a woman is with child. Matthew translates that, behold, a virgin will conceive. Those are really different. Where I come from, if a woman is with child, she's not a virgin. Maybe things are different in Morris County, I don't know. But that's not in the Hebrew. You need to go back and know that. And we've known that since 125 AD, but we didn't bother to share that with anybody. Why? Because Trypho was a Jew, and it's okay to disregard anything Jews said, and because it was terribly inconvenient, and because the Christian faith got more and more powerful, we didn't have to deal with critics, so we just sort of ignored it. And that's gone on for a long time. Everything that I write about, everything that I talk about in the Bible has been public knowledge in Christian circles for about 200 years. And I'm amazed that it comes across to people as something new and surprising and controversial. About 200 years ago, a German New Testament scholar at the University of Tübingen, his name was David Friedrich Strauss, put all of this and much more into a book entitled The Life of Jesus Critically Examined. It was translated into English in 1859 by a woman named George Eliot, who wrote Silas Marner. That's been available, therefore, for about 160 years in English. How many people have ever heard of David Friedrich Strauss? How many people have ever engaged his understanding of the New Testament? And indeed, for his efforts, this 27-year-old brilliant biblical scholar was fired from Tübingen. And he was never allowed to be a teacher again at any institution of higher learning in all of Europe, because he sort of threatened ecclesiastical power. And they couldn't stand it. They began to repress him. There has been, I believe, a conspiracy of silence about the Bible in the Christian church for almost all of our history. And I think we ought to look at that. Things that are deemed today to be controversial only because nobody's ever heard about them before have been in the public arena for about 200 years. Now, what's going on in a church where officially we know some things but refuse to communicate them? We keep our people in ignorance. Someone said the church treats its lay people as just like they're mushrooms. You keep them in the dark and cover them over with fertilizer. And so they never have a chance to engage the issues that, as I say, are commonplace in the world of Christian scholarship. We have, almost from the beginning of Christian history, erected a kind of aura around the Bible that said you dare not ask a question about it. You accept it like it is. You quote it in any way you want to prove almost any point, and people do that all the time. And that prevents anyone from treating the Bible with scholarship. It prevents anyone from asking a question. Indeed, we've taught lay people, if you ask critical questions, there must be something wrong with your faith. That's a strange way to treat intelligent people. Maybe back in the 13th century, and the only people that could read and write were the clergy, you could get away with that. But I don't think you can get away with that in a congregation of suburban Morris County folks who attend St. Peter's Church. I think you've got to feed those people with the best knowledge that you possibly have. The church actually tried to keep people from reading the Bible. That's why we kept it in Latin for so long. Nobody spoke Latin. So you read the Bible in Latin, and then people could tell you that it said whatever they wanted you to think that it said. It's a fascinating thing to see that when people began to translate the Vulgate into the common languages of Europe, they were immediately persecuted by the church. The English hero of that movement is a man named John Wycliffe. He was a late 15th century English country vicar who studied language, Latin and English, and he dared to translate the Vulgate into English. He did that about 1440. His translation is the basis of the King James Version that came out in 1611. But so angry were church officials about this that when old John Wycliffe died, they later had his body exhumed so they could burn him at the stake. Pretty interesting thing to do. I don't know that it bothered old John Wycliffe. But, you know, they were symbolically acting out threat and fear. And when the printing press was invented in the 15th century, and books began to be printed, we decided that we'd have to print the Bible different from the way we printed every other book. That was a conscious decision. So we printed it on tissue-thin pages, gilt-edged, put it inside a floppy leather cover, put a cross on its top. And one other thing, this little battered Bible, but it's still pretty special to me. Another thing we did, look at how we printed it. In columns. Do you know any other books that are printed in columns? Well, the telephone directory, encyclopedias, and dictionaries. Is anybody supposed to read those books? What do you suppose was behind their thinking when they made the Bible look like an encyclopedia or dictionary? You only go to it for answers. You don't go to it to study it or to read it. It was almost a conspiracy. I'm reading a commentary by a man named Westcott at this moment on John's Gospel. It was published in 1908. And even the commentary is in columns, 2 columns on each page, in tiny little print. It's really very difficult to work through. But in any event, the Bible has been discouraged from study, from reading, from scholarly questions by the Christian church. And look at how we treat it in public worship. Watch a procession come in, and the Bible is held up. Why do you do that? For adoration? Is there something about this book that's supposed to be adored? This book points to God. It is not God. This book points to Christ. It is not Christ. We elevate the book to invite people to adore the book. Why do you think fundamentalism is so rampant in this country? We've encouraged it. We've encouraged it as a church. And when we read lessons in church, what do we say at the end of the Bible? This is the word of the Lord. Well, it's hard to argue with that. You know, you want to stand and say, oh, I don't think so, Lord. No, that doesn't work. But read the Bible sometimes and see if you want to blame God for everything you find in it. Slaves, obey your masters. Is that the word of the Lord? Wives, obey your husbands. Is that the word of the Lord? Women are to keep quiet in church. That'd make Janet pretty irrelevant, wouldn't it? I forbid a woman to have authority over a man. That's Paul. Homosexuals are to be put to death. Is that the word of the Lord? What kind of propaganda is this? That we read from this book, which is 66 books written over a period of 1,000 years between about 1000 BC and 135 AD, and we attribute to that book God's word. That's idolatry. And that book thinks that mental sickness and epilepsy are caused by demon possession. God's not very bright. There are all sorts of things that we have propagandized.